to this conclusion. Two pieces of framing and a principle and an argument. First piece of framing, this is to preempt any op stuff on family and relatives. I think in most circumstances, family and relatives are usually against euthanasia. They may support an attempt to respect your choices in the situation to undergo this aspect if you're unable to have the capacity to do it, but would rather you stay alive even if you're deteriorating, and they don't say it only in the respect of their own self and your own choices. Especially in this case where you can perform basic sets of function, speak and talk, and be there as an anchor for them. Also, in this instance, family probably also has heard the declaration by blood, because this is literally after life-threatening stroke, which probably would have invited the family would be around in this area. Therefore, not only will they likely see this as violence by Dr. Yu going against the autonomy of blood in this situation, which will make them resentful to you for the rest of their life. It's quite likely that you get threatened by lawsuits on their side of the house, and the burden is on you to prove on the court the amount of cognitive deterioration that has happened to be able to prove this as such, and the causality that this led to this or not. This is an advanced directive, not a DNR, which is directive not to save or act, but advanced directives allow you to commit violence without liability, but you can always refuse to act on it as a doctor, which means on our side, this is something that will probably fall on our side if Op wants to make this argument. Second piece of framing an offense, doctors don't know that the statement by Vlad is being made is because of the cognitive deterioration, or is it because of the aspect of him like feeling like cowardice in the moment of truth, in the moment that he might be killed because he has had some aspect here, right? When faced with that, people often change their mind all the time. People change their mind about the law, probably surgeries, etc., when they're life threatening at the last moment, because it's often quite hard to think about death in the very first place. And the point here is not whether this is caused by it or not. There's a second degree order. The idea is you, as a doctor, in many situations, don't have epistemological access to know what is causing this. So in this situation, if you don't know them, it's quite likely and it's quite important for you to listen to what the current blood is saying. And this will go quite well with reference to our argumentation on autonomy. Therefore, the first principle here that we'll make here is on an autonomy principle, right? And the key observation to make here is quite simple, that the person who is currently here is the current Vlad is more important than the previous Vlad that existed in all of this time, because this is the Vlad that has the maximal amount of information at the current sets of feelings, at the current sets of fact that this Vlad is feeling, the current sets of emotion this Vlad is feeling, meaning that in this given situation, we have to prioritize this different Vlad rather than the previous Vlad, and the autonomy of this new Vlad rather than the prior Vlad. And any kind of contract that opposition might want to say is negligible, because the current person's autonomy matters far more than the previous person's autonomy because of what has happened, right? And the question here is this, right? We, in most circumstances, in medical situation and even in real life, value autonomy a lot, because autonomy is the ability to make informed and voluntary decisions about your own life. This is why we allow people to have that choice. This is why we even allowed Vlad to sign the advanced directive in the very first place, even if in many situations this was not okay, right? This means in the current circumstances, a person's identity preferences are always changing. They're changing over time. They're changing with new information. Maybe if I heard that I had HIV today and I didn't want to like just deteriorate and die, but tomorrow I hear that the cure of HIV has come out, I have the capacity to change my decision and change to like maybe like not be euthanized, or like maybe that's a bad example. But in many situations, if tomorrow a cure comes by, I have the ability to be able to shift my decisions given new updated information in the circumstances. This means that if my future self now has like more information, more understanding of my preferences and knowledge, in this situation, the third premise then comes into play, that the past self decisions are based on prior conditions and beliefs, the prior sets of understanding, the prior sets of memory the previous person was going through that was so painful, etc., and so forth. In this circumstance, this is a new set of person with a new set of conditions and beliefs that have been updated, which means if the future self is a fundamentally different person in a different cognitive state and altered value systems because of like the illness, etc., and the way they perceive this. This means that the future self now has the right, the future Vlad has the right to make a decision based on your own current decisions and circumstances. And the autonomy in present is the most important aspect, because the prior Vlad is not here anymore. And in this situation, there's a direct conflict. So if you have to prioritize one, you have to prioritize the future Vlad, the Vlad that currently exists in front of you, that's saying, please don't commit violence on me as a doctor. Please don't kill me. I want to live. And in this situation, you have a like right to respect this particular person. The fifth premise here, and this is called like the final thing that ties this all together is in this set of like in this set of prioritization, you should value this current person and not cause violence here. So we have proven to you right now that in this situation, when you have two conflicting autonomies and you're trying to do the first thing based on a maximization of autonomy. So the idea of euthanasia is based on the maximization of autonomy of prior Vlad, and now you have two sets of autonomy conflicts. You should focus on the current autonomy rather than the autonomy of a previous person that's not here anymore, that's less morally significant than the current person. And if like you fail to like refuse to listen to this autonomy principle, then you've already like ended the debate, because in many situations this is the reason you're allowing this in the very first place. But a second thing in this instance is just on the idea that euthanasia is bad. Allowing people to be able to choose to kill themselves is quite bad in many circumstances. First, because you're like it has direct effect both on the people committing the act as well as the people who the act is being committed to. We often don't know how we'll feel about these things. We often feel very impulsive and hopeless in situations and believe we want to do certain things because we are not optimistic about our quality of life going forward in many situations. In these situations, it's important for us and we as society preserve the capacity, the importance of life in many first place, and don't allow other people to commit violence towards another person, even if they ask to. So if my quality of life is going really, really bad because of my mental health, because of other things happening in my life, and I believe that I'm a good judge of this can happen to me, and I don't want to live if something else happens, I don't think in these circumstances we allow them. In the same reason, euthanasia is also similar degrees of immoral, because you're allowing individuals to consent to euthanasia, you're allowing other people to cause violence to them, which means we're just laying unethical foundations and the slippery slope gets large and large and large, which means in many circumstances, we actually don't want euthanasia to exist in society, especially not in this situation, given our first argument, meaning like even if the first argument was false, even if you want to prioritize the previous person, euthanasia by itself is really, really bad, right? Through this process, we've proven to you that euthanasia as an action itself is just fundamentally like inviolable. It's something that's fundamentally harmful, that we shouldn't do this. But finally, and this is the main principle, right? Maybe Vlad will live, maybe Vlad will not live, maybe Vlad's situation will not change across time. But the people who will have to live with these actions are people of the family, people, the doctors who are performing this surgery in those situations, who had to hear the violence, because this is not the same Vlad that was happy with their choice. This is the Vlad that's going to resist. You probably have to deceive Vlad into action that, oh, we're going to let you live, and then kill him off. I think this action itself causes horror for many, many years to come in the doctors who perform these things. These are not things that they do on a regular basis. So in the instance where Vlad is probably not affected and you weigh both of the Vlads in the same level, it's important to weigh the doctors and family around them and the people who will be harmed by this. Very proud to propose.
Three prior framing arguments. One, euthanasia in general is morally justified. Life does not have inherent value. It's just a metabolic process. There's no ontological good in the process of neuron activation and heart muscle contractions that separates life from death. Two, agentic choice is the ultimate determinant of value. Individuals can construct their own preferences and decide for themselves what they deem to be valuable. You might prefer a life full of work and money. I might prefer a life full of family and peaceful walks. These choices are ultimately only evaluated through our expressed preferences. In this specific instance, people like Vlad have a choice to decide whether they live or whether they die. This is the intrinsic response to the slippery slope argument, right? We evaluate if people are making their own choices and their own informed choices with regard to their own euthanasia. And when they don't make informed choices, we stop them and we prevent that euthanasia. But informed consent and agentic choice is the only slippery slope that should be of concern in the round, not whether or not people are allowed to live or die. Three, when there are dueling agentic claims, as there are here, cognitive informity should be what breaks the deadlock. No cognition is perfect, but when there are dueling claims and people express countervailing preferences, we need to evaluate which is the most relevant claim to autonomy. Choice is only valuable if the choice is informed and not coerced, because the underlying logic principle of agency maximization only holds when people make free and informed choices about what they deem good and right. So whatever choice Vlad made in the informed and cogent state is the most appropriate choice to maximize his agency and satisfy our principal burden. There are three other potential considerations we could use over cognitive informity. The first is recency. But recency has no moral value, especially in the face of cognitive impairment. Me donating to a charity today is not more morally virtuous than donating to a charity a week ago, absent any potential concerns surrounding inflation. Temporal concerns are entirely agnostic to the core evaluatory framework of the principle at hand. Omesh implies that Vlad has more information due to a passage of time, but at a link level that's outweighed by the cognitive decline Vlad has experienced over the same period of time. Information in the absence of a cognitive capacity to process and think through that information has no ability on somebody's agentic ability to determine whether or not they made a good choice. The second potential consideration we could evaluate is reversibility. Note, per the fiat of the motion, reversibility is non-unique on either side of the house. The Gov condemns Vlad to a life of pain and suffering because they cannot euthanize him in the future. So the comparative is forced life, painful life, irreversible life, just as death is irreversible on our side of the house. The third consideration is this interesting argument that comes from the Gov that the current Vlad is a different person and therefore entitled to different rights and privileges. Even if this was true, that the government had proved a significant moral discontinuity, it doesn't matter. People have forward-looking consideration toward their own bodily autonomy. I have the right to get my ears pierced, despite the fact future me will also have those ears pierced. I have the right to get a tattoo, despite the fact future me will also have that tattoo. This is because moral discontinuities are never understood through the question of whether or not our future selves are intrinsically different from our present selves. Rather, they're understood by whether or not we have the agentic ability to predict what our future self would value. Even if, like, new Vlad was an entirely different person, it doesn't matter because I've done the work to explain to you why agentic choice and informed agentic consent is the only question as to whether or not we can determine the ontology of value, which means that new Vlad, who does not have the ability to make informed consent decisions, has no moral value. But old Vlad, who did have the ability to make informed moral consent decisions, does have moral value. And so the preferences of old Vlad outweigh the preferences of new Vlad, even if they are intrinsically separate people. Three arguments then. Our first argument is that the most principally relevant expression of Vladimir's consent is the advance directive. First, Vlad has just experienced a significant cognitive decline. This means he's lacking full information about his condition and his decision to remain alive. By contrast, when signing the advance directive, he was fully aware of his circumstances and that he might regret his choice later. He made that choice with those considerations in mind. For all of the framing above, cognition and informed consent is the only relevant principled consideration in the round. Secondly, given Vladimir's constant cognitive decline and immense pain, his desire to remain alive is likely the result of his biological impulses. However, it's not clear why one's biological impulses are morally significant. They're just neuron activation and chemical reactions within the body. There is a moral distinction between one's rational self and one's intellectual self. The rational self is the only arbiter of the good. This beats any arguments Omesh might make about, the potential coercion of death or the looming threat of the void. Because if anything, the biological impulses work the opposite way to hijack our ability to rationalize what is good and what is bad in favor of our body's base survival instincts, which have no ontological good. Thirdly, the state of extreme pain warps cognition in one of two ways. Either the pain itself prevents rational thought, so Vlad is incapable of consenting, or the heavy-duty painkillers that his doctors likely put him on warp rational thought, so Vlad is incapable of consenting. This means that Vladimir now has lesser moral value than the conscious Vladimir who signed the advance directive. And as a result, we should prioritize the most principally relevant actor, the informed and rationally thinking Vladimir, and honor the advance directive. Our second argument is that refusing to honor the advance directive will get the hospital in a ton of legal trouble. The critical legal distinction is the advance directive is written on a piece of paper, witnessed, and is a legally binding document. The protestation to life is spoken, overheard by a single or potentially multiple doctors, and is likely unclearly articulated. Moreover, Vladimir clearly was not of right mind and able body, and thus would be unable to make legal declarations that would hold any weight in a court of law. There are four mechanisms by which the hospital gets into legal trouble. One, the hospital in-house counsel comes down on the doctors and compels the euthanization. Two, the doctor's malpractice insurance finds out that the doctors are at fault and intervenes. Three, Vladimir's insurance company, who Shurish doesn't want to pay for him for the years to come, intervenes. Or four, Vladimir's family, who witnessed the advance directive but not the protestation to life, sue the hospital. I think the Prime Minister does a lot of work to minimize the last risk surrounding the family, but the family's just not the most litigious actor in this scenario. The insurance company definitely is, because they have better lawyers, more familiarity with the law, etc., etc. In these instances, it's incredibly likely the hospital loses for a few reasons. One, the hospital won't want to fight the lawsuit. It's a lost legal battle and terrible PR. Two, the doctor's malpractice insurance will order them not to fight because of the potential liability. And three, even if the hospital fights, the legal ethics of advance directives do trump unclear protestations as a matter of law. So the impact is simple. If the doctors don't euthanize, the courts will compel the hospital or some other medical practitioner to action. This means Vladimir dies anyway, except he spends extra time in pain. The doctors likely face malpractice hearings and increased insurance premiums, and the hospitals have to pay millions to their lawyers, all of which are net negative for the system as a whole. But let's assume argument 2 magically doesn't happen and that Vladimir is kept alive for the rest of his natural life. Argument 3, this causes healthcare trade-offs within the rest of the hospital. 4 warrants. One, doctors have to trade off time and energy monitoring Vladimir's incredibly rare and likely non-traditional case. And two, nurses have to trade off time and energy, again, taking care of Vladimir, someone for which there is likely no pre-established diagnostic or treatment pattern. Three, the hospital has to spend money on procedures to keep Vladimir alive. People in extreme pain consume a lot of opioids. You have to monitor that course of treatment. There are a lot of costs associated with that. Four, the hospital uses a bed that could otherwise be used for another patient. This doesn't seem like much. It's just one extra patient. But over time, it's incredibly likely that taking care of Vladimir causes another patient to die of medical error. Why is this the case? A, hospitals overwork both doctors and nurses, keeping them on 16-plus-hour shifts and in a state of near constant sleep deprivation. In this context, even an additional 10 minutes of work might seriously exacerbate the cognitive impairment associated with sleep deprivation, leading to silly mistakes like basic misdiagnoses, the wrong prescription being given, etc. This is the likeliest outcome that causes someone to die in the hospital. Two, many hospitals pay for pro bono cases, patients not covered by insurance, through their financial profit. Taking care of Vladimir, which is likely an expensive process given the rarity of disease, reduces the profit pool available for those pro bono cases. Many of those cases were likely easy fixes because the hospital would prioritize the people they could actually help. But now, because all of that time, money, and that extra bed is going to Vladimir, the hospital cannot help those people. They have to turn them away and leave them to die. The weighing is incredibly simple. At the point at which the vast majority of hospitals in the United States are at a severe breaking point with respect to their own resources, at the point at which medical error constitutes like some 35% of preventable deaths at a hospital, taking care of Vladimir will likely trade off not just a single life, but multiple lives, especially if he lives for year upon year upon year. The impact is simple. Vladimir is not more morally valuable or less morally valuable than any other person being harmed. There is no deontological burden that privileges the hospital to take care of Vladimir over anyone else, or at least not one yet articulated by the Gov. And so we ought to prioritize these future patients who will be hurt as a result of all of these resources going to Vladimir. The last thing I want to touch is the doctors being harmed. It's unclear that they're unwilling to euthanize, and certainly they're probably more harmed by getting into legal trouble and having to worry about their own insurance woes. Very proud to oppose.